Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Coach's Corner. We got the whole gang here, and today we're going to be talking about pocket picks. So, dual maining, pocket picks, however you want to word, that's going to be the main topic. You know, Ultimate and Smash in general has had a huge history of this, and unlike other fighting games, the stages are also very impactful to the character picks as well. So it's going to be interesting. Let us know in the comments below what you guys think about pocket picks. If you think it's better to solo main, if you think it's better to dual main / pocket picks, and like, comment, and subscribe if you are enjoying the content, and make sure to check us out on Metafy as well, or not Metafy, Spotify as well. So yeah, let's just get right into the episode. I think with the early meta of pocket picks, we saw, especially year one, Palutena and Wolf were the go-to pocket picks. Obviously, we didn't have DLC back then, so they were very strong characters and very pick up and go characters. But nowadays, I mean, we fast forward like 4 or 5 years from now, or from then, it's crazy how defined the meta is, where you can't really get away with picking up Wolf and Palu. They have also gotten weaker. They've gotten nerfed and stuff like that, but just really, really different in terms of strength. Palutena and Wolf as pockets, not so great. And even solo main Palutena and Wolves are struggling. They have to really push their characters in this current meta. And to me, the pocket picks nowadays that are strong are Lucina. Cloud, I think, is another very powerful pocket pick that is more on the simple side, right? And I think when we talk about pocket picks, we're thinking more like very simple, copy paste fundamentals. The strategy is very simple, right? You don't have to put as much time into the character. That is for most people. Now, when you watch like Leo or Tweak have pocket picks or dual mains, it's a whole nother story because they have way more experience in competing and in multiple Smash games, and they've kind of gone through this process. So I wouldn't say it's like the best idea to copy those players' pocket picks or dual main picks. If you're like a mid or a high level player, you need to understand, oh, my level of play is and experience is a lot lower. So what can I do to match up with that, right? Or if you do something a little bit more complex, you have to understand like, oh, hey, this is going to take more time for me to see like results or improvement in my play. But even in Smash 4, Cloud was an amazing pocket pick, was the pocket pick actually of the game. Very simple, very effective. So it kind of feels like it's coming back full circle just because Cloud is kind of having an uptick in the meta, right? And especially because of the Cloud buffs.
For sure. I think pocket picks, the thing about Ultimate that's interesting is that we came into Ultimate with the expectation that you should have a pocket pick. And I think the same was true for Smash 4, because in Brawl you have Meta Knight, who was I think the best pocket pick that Smash has ever seen, right? Of course, like in the meta a little bit less so because people knew the character very well. But in terms of like simplicity versus payoff, Meta Knight was, the best character in terms of pocket picks. And so we went into Smash 4 with this mentality of pocket picks, which eventually led to everyone having a Cloud or a Bayo for that sense. But I feel like Smash Ultimate has never been a game in which pocket picks were very powerful. And I think that's because from the get-go, the developers just nerfed all of the unique tools in the game, right? Spin Dash got nerfed, Pin got nerfed, a lot of Cloud's unique tools got nerfed, even in patches, right? Something like Wolf Laser, very like unique tool, got nerfed. So in that sense, like the individual power level of characters got toned down, which we see in the balance, and the power of like the fundamental ideas in the engine, relatively to the characters, got increased. And because of that, like oftentimes, if you want to solve a problem, your character probably has the tools to solve it. So I feel like in general, just like the mindset and the engine were kind of at odds at each other from the beginning. And the only character that really could like solve that was, like Charles mentioned, Palutena, because the character absolutely took a dump on heavies, right? Like you had a single nair, it would take like 10 seconds to complete the animation, as she would combo another like a million, and people didn't know how to SDI, etc., etc. So I think as the meta progressed, we've seen a huge emphasis on solo mains, and only recently have dual mains really gotten a resurgence, right? And you can talk about like Tweak or Leo as like, quote unquote dual mainers, but I feel like both of them succeed the most when they have like one true focus, you know what I mean? There are a few dual mainers that succeed. I think Spargo counts as one, right? He actually uses the Aegis regularly enough. I think Proto is a really, really good example. But I think it's more of a recent thing, and I think that's interesting because the engine is so different, people have taken a lot of time to like understand how does my character function within this engine, what are the, you know, like the exact workings of this engine, and it's just taken that long of a time before people are comfortable enough with one character to have the room to actually learn another character. So for me, dual maining or choosing a pocket, it goes two ways, right? One is you apply the skills you already learned to another character so that you skip a lot of the learning, right? So think about like everyone who plays Cloud and Sephiroth, because like, you know, they both are sword characters that work from like similar ish distances. And they both have well, I don't want to say like the same, but they have similar matchup strats, right? Generally they do well against the same type of characters. There are some differences, of course, but you know. So that's like one way of going about it. And generally the way I visualize that is that it gives you an alternative option that helps you more on a player level, right? So when you're playing a matchup and you're just not feeling it, it gives you an alternative, stuff like that. I think Leo very much in this camp, right? Like he will apply his fundamentals from one character to another character seamlessly. Now the other route, and I think the one that is like the strongest in like the long term, is to pick a character that's entirely different, right? So like, you know, Proto playing Lucina and Min Min, like whoa, extremely different characters. But the
like
difference
one,
is,
right? Like Diddy.
yeah,
And
Tweak is
Sephiroth,
another
right?
one.
Like
Diddy,
you're
Seth.
you're mixing two archetypes rather than like copy and pasting. Like, oh, this is a sword character that's also speedy and does this, like Pyramithra, right? And then this is a sword character that does this. Leo does have some outliers that go outside of that, like Meta Knight and Joker, but for the most part, I'd say like 80% of the characters he plays is sword characters, right?
Yeah. So like having two different archetypes, of course, gives you a lot of strengths in terms of stage choices, in terms of matchup chart, etc. And I think so for Leo, you can argue that he has like two archetypes as well, where like on one hand, we've seen him like break through in Smash 4 with the quote unquote Whiff Punisher in Meta Knight, which is also kind of how Joker plays, and to a large degree also how Mithra can play. And then as we saw him kind of grow in Smash, he went to like Cloud and Marth, who are more like the, you know, the spacing sword characters, which is more like the Byleth, or in this character the Marth as well, or the Icon Lucine as we've seen before. So like definitely patterns there. But generally, I think the first step to picking up a pocket for anyone is to figure out like what do you want from the pocket. Are you looking to get the best matchup chart in the game, or are you looking to have like a backup that is within your comfort? Because there, you know, like there's a lot of pluses and minuses to switching characters, both in terms of your own mentality as well as like what you're inflicting on the opponent, right? Because if you're in like that spacing mentality and you suddenly have to play a Whiff Punisher, like that does require like a very extreme mindset switch. So like I would recommend like anyone from top to like lower level, like really think like what am I trying to get out of my secondary, and then consider like what are the options that fit that criteria.
Yeah, I think a big one too is time management. How much time do you have to put into the game? When you look at players like Tweak and Leo, this is their job. They've already put in copious amounts of time into the game. Like an insane amount of time in previous Smash titles. In this particular Smash title, especially in the beginning of the game, they're probably grinding for, 8+ hours every single day. And you have to think to yourself, do you have that much time to refine a 2 to 3 character roster, right? And I think it really starts maxing out at 3. I coached Tweak and Leffen on TSM for 2 years, and one thing I really stressed to Tweak was like, hey, like 3 is a lot already. Let's at least not go past 3. I know you're really talented, and I know you know this game a lot, but 3 characters is already, I feel like, really pushing your limits. And I think 2 is very good. 2 is a very good sweet spot where it's like, oh, you're practicing friendlies. Like I switch in between 2. And then because if you're switching in between 2, that muscle, or I mean, not muscle, but that cadence is a lot easier to get used to, right? Okay, I'm switching from Diddy and then going to Sephiroth, switching from this pacing to this pacing, this pacing to this pacing. It's just back and forth, right? When you go 3, it's like, oh shit, now I'm like doing that, and then I'm also playing like this weird airdrift character, Wario, who's like, I need to have like insane airdrift mix-ups, insane whiff punishing and positioning, just so I'm right outside of range, and then full max drift in like with the aerial and then get something started, right? Like it's a whole nother ball game, right? And in the beginning of the game when players weren't as strong and you're essentially just like, oh, I'm just way more experienced than you, so I can like spread myself thin and still beat 90% of the player base, right? I don't think that's the case anymore for a lot of these top players because so much people are catching up, especially all the solo mains, right? They're mastering their craft hyper specifically to the character, and it's like, oh, well, now these matchups are getting pushed farther and farther. And on top of that, with how balanced Ultimate is, it I feel like this is the game. If there is a game to solo main with a not top 5 character, this can be the game to do it. Now, obviously, the game to solo main is going to be a game with just a really, really broken character, right? So, in the past Brawl Meta Knight, there's like no ifs, ands, or buts. That's an easy solo main. Like, you just solo main that character. You should be fine if you're just competing and you like the character enough. And the character was so much more broken. It's hard not to like to play Meta Knight. You know what I mean? Because you're just so much stronger and you're quicker and stuff like that. But yeah, and another thing too is just why are you playing the pocket? Because I feel like most players, a pocket is like slapping a band-aid on something and just being like, you know what, like put some tape on it, put some duct tape, solving the problem now kind of thing, right? Like, and I mean, I've experienced this in all levels of play where you can play someone with your main and then play like some weird pocket character that's like a heavy or some weird archetype, and then you end up winning more with that character. That doesn't necessarily mean like, oh yeah, I should compete with this character. It's like, oh well, that person probably just has a weakness to that. How long does that last? What level of play does that last to, right? When you start getting to like mid and high level, people aren't going to have those weaknesses as much, and especially if you get to top level, you're not going to cheese someone with your pocket Donkey Kong, right? Like you're not going to catch them off surprise. So you got to also think about how long lasting this plan or your time investment is, right? You're going to invest time. How long lasting is this time investment going to be? How long is it going to return to you? And I feel like most people just pick up pockets because they don't want to play bad matchups. That's just at the end of the day, right? No one likes playing bad matchups, but I feel like you grow so much as a player playing through bad matchups, and you also learn a lot of things about your character. Like something that Light started innovating a lot, and I don't know if it's necessarily because of the Game & Watch matchup, but the main out versus Game & Watch for Light, if you watch any Light versus Meister sets, is Sour Dash Attack on normal get up. Normal get up is very hard to react to, but Fox's Dash Attack is so quick that once you see Game & Watch like do some type of movement, you can react with Dash Attack, get the Sour hit, get the pop up at like 80%, true combo in the back here, and that's death. Now, killing Game & Watch, unless he does something unsafe on shield in that matchup, is really tough because he can up B out of all these things, right? But now there's a win condition, right? And now Light can focus all of his neutral game to replicating this win condition. Oh, I can't do anything on shield. What if I grab you and 4-3 you to ledge? Now my win con is online, right? So even just that whole thought process happening only happens when you're put in a bad matchup, because if Fox doesn't have to do that, then he's going to do like the classic, just up air the shit out of you and all that stuff. But the thing that's great is, what if in a winning matchup or an even matchup, before that setup, that ledge setup, right? Now that matchup's even more in your favor. And you only get that growth by going through the bad matchups, playing through the tough matchups. And it forces you to find other win conditions in other areas. Now, obviously, Fox is a very strong character. So at the end of the day, you just need to find one out in a specific scenario, and your neutral should be able to replicate that out. Not every character has that privilege. Obviously, there's certain limitations to certain characters, but that example is something that's specific because I just watch a lot of Light and I play Fox. So that's something that I've seen develop throughout the Fox meta, but I wouldn't say the only reason it happened was because of the Game & Watch matchup. But at the end of the day, my main point is playing through bad matchups. If your character's just overall strong enough, it can get you to the point, and Ultimate's balanced enough to do this, right? In other Smash games, what I'm talking about doesn't really exist, right? In Brawl and stuff like that. Like if you're Ness and Lucas and you're up against Marth, no matter how you slice it, like it's really hard. You can still play anti-grab, but it's still really hard. And in Brawl, you could get grabbed once and that would be it. But it pushes the meta for a lot of characters. And I think it has to make a lot of sense, and you have to enjoy the character too. I think a lot of people will force pockets and be like, man, I hate playing this character. It's so boring, yada, yada, yada. And if you're not enjoying the game, then you're not going to put enough time into that pocket for it to matter, right? Because the motivation's not there. So yeah, just really think about all the outside resources before you actually go into picking stuff on paper for the game, for your character lineup, because all the other outside resources are more important than the on paper. Because for example, I used to main Wolf, then I switched over to Fox, and there was a time where I dual main Fox and Wolf. It's a really shitty, like they don't cover each other's bad matchups or anything. But the way I thought about it was, if I want someone fast, quick, snappy, fast hitboxes, I go Fox. And if I want the spacey that's like a little slower, but I have larger hitboxes with a laser, then I go Wolf. That was really how I picked the character, right? If I want to play it at a slower pace, Wolf. If I want to play more just movement based with quicker hitbox, I went Fox. And that it can be as simple as that.
I think that represents a lot of the SoCal Wolf Fox pairs that popped up during early Ultimate. And that was probably the same methodology they used to pick which one they were using in which matchup. So for me personally, whenever I'm giving a recommendation, it's important to note why you're playing, what you're trying to get out of playing. I think most players are just trying to play what they think is fun, what they're comfortable with, in which case I'm probably not the person to ask for this, because usually what I do is I start in reverse. So I don't think about what the characters are. I look at the positions. Like, what is it that you dislike about this matchup? Like, what positions is it that are troubling you? What stages is it that you really don't like? And then there's two ways you can go through it. You can either just ask yourself, if you have the general knowledge, what are the stages or characters that play well to those positions? And also, on the other end, you can just ask yourself, what does my opponent dislike me creating in this? And the difference between those two is one usually requires you to have a little bit more game understanding. The other one, you can just listen to your opponent bitch. And then if you hear them complain about something, you should probably have that in the back of your mind. And then if you hear like multiple players of that character complain about something, it doesn't matter whether or not it's true. It doesn't matter if it's actually a bad matchup. It doesn't matter if there's no answer to it or not. What matters is whether they're comfortable with it or not. And so if you hear a bunch of people who, let's say, if you hear all the Foxes complaining about Luigi, it doesn't matter what that matchup is. You should probably be playing Luigi versus Fox if that's your problem. If you hear about the Swordies complaining about Kazuya, it doesn't matter whether or not you think it's a 50-50. Just play Kazuya, dude. Learn the combos, get it done. For the most part, and I know we've discussed this before about player ruthlessness, but a lot of top players don't ask themselves, what do I think the actual best character I can play is? And then just lab into that. They ask, what do I like playing? And then what's the best thing I can do within those limitations? And so that's usually the way that works at top level. But the theoretical top performance that we haven't seen that we would see is if top players actually put their time where their mouth is. If they say, hey, this character is broken, or hey, this stage is broken, they would actually be playing it and not say things like, oh, I have morals. Like, no, you don't. You play video game, dude. It's not that deep. The idea, like when you're min-maxing and you actually want to do what's best, be honest with yourself. And there's two ways that can pan out. So sometimes when you think something is actually the strongest thing you can be doing, or if you actually think that a matchup is super strong as a counter pick, you go for that matchup, and then you find out it's a lot harder than you thought it was. And sometimes it's just a matter of you need to put in more time, you need to learn more. Sometimes it's a matter of, well, you were wrong in the first place, and your assumption itself was what is incorrect. And you can learn something from that. So I think that when you are going through the counterpicking process, what's most rewarding in the long term is the willingness to accept that your assumptions are going to be incorrect sometimes, probably a lot of the time, and to go ahead and learn from those and ask yourself, well, how will I know that my assumption is incorrect? And so when you're going into the matchup or you're wanting to counterpick, write down statements that are going to be true if you counterpick correctly, and then just try and disprove those statements. So if I were to say, I think Lucina is very good against Luigi because Lucina can keep Luigi out, and then you play a set with Lucina versus Luigi, and then you find out that Luigi just kept getting his hits anyways, you need to ask yourself, do other Lucinas keep away Luigi? Or is it a matter of my play with Lucina is what is needing to be improved here, because normally Lucina can keep out Luigi. And so you actually look at other people's VODs, you look at this, and then if the other Lucinas aren't keeping out Luigi, then your assumption is wrong. And Lucina doesn't keep out Luigi. If they do, then maybe you just need to invest some more time into Lucina and then try it out and see if it's worth it. And then, like Charles said, it's a matter of time investment. You need to ask yourself and be honest with yourself. What am I willing to put in? For me personally, I don't practice Smash at all. If I wanted to be good at the game, or rather, if I want to beat someone without being good at the game, I'm just going to play a Game & Watch because I know I can input the smash attacks. I know I can find the openings to land those smash attacks. And then I don't have to practice anything because down smash, forward smash works just as well for me as it does for Meister. So the idea here is that you need to be honest with yourself, be honest with what you can input to execute, and then just it doesn't matter if Kazuya is a super powerful character because the character actually does require mechanical upkeep. And if you are only putting in like an hour or two of Smash and your practice is just you playing some games with your friends, Kazuya is probably not going to be a good counterpick character for you, regardless of how good he is. And that's just the way it is. Like you need to understand that there's, well, how a character starts, then how a character progresses as you improve with them. How the character starts being the skill floor, and then how you improve with them being the skill ceiling. And so generally you want to pick a character that's going to have a more effective skill floor when you are counter picking a character. And then you want to avoid characters that have a demanding skill floor. Because if it's like, say, Greninja, there is no one who's going to be picking Pocket Greninja and then beating somebody who's at their level with that character. Like, you can beat somebody you're better than, but it's not the modifier that you're looking for. So keep in mind, different characters have different applications, and how good a character is not necessarily directly related to how good a character is as a counter pick because of this investment factor, because of this time factor. And so keep that in mind. Keep in mind what stages you specifically win. Again, as mentioned before, if you realize that the only times you really hate this matchup is on an FD or Battlefield, then the characters that are good on FD are usually different from the characters that are good on Battlefield. And so even if it's a good matchup, if you're only wanting to play it on the stages that are particularly strong for that character, then that would make that a better choice in the long run. For example, if you just don't want to play on Battlefield against a character, Min Min's not as going to be as good as if, let's say, you only want to play against FD, in which case she's one of the best counterpick characters in the game, which is, again, if you look at the proto dynamic, he frequently chooses it based on stage. He chooses it based on what adaptations and positions he sees from the opponent and where the opponent places himself to adapt to what he's doing. So there's a few layers to that, but you want to keep in mind that you want characters that are strong at the positions that make you uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable about your opponent running away all game, pick a character that wins if your opponent runs away all game. So it's generally how I view it.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts, Bam, on like just picking pockets and stuff in general?
I think it's pockets are always interesting. I think that's always good for people to play a multitude of characters. I think when it comes to actually doing it in tournament, though, you got to be honest with yourself, which we've all been talking about so far. I think one big thing is that sometimes when you are able to play characters, you really are able to further discern what is a character issue, what is a maybe something hard to deal with on a global level in the game, and what is a personal struggle, right? So I think it is good to play with other characters because there's going to be some characters that are more fundamental based, right? And that will give you a good snapshot of what matters in the game. But ultimately, when you're able to play a multitude of characters, that helps that even like exponentially, right? And I think especially in this game where we have a lot of knowledge checks, it's very important to understand where those nuances come into play, right? And sometimes that's just not going to be able to be done outside of solo. I mean, even some of these other people that you see that are diehard solo mains, they still play a ton of pocket characters, but they're just not ever going to see the light of tournament because that's not what they're for, right? So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is, yeah, we saw some pockets early on in the meta for obvious reason. A lot of it was really ease of use, right? People recognize, oh, this character is really strong in kills, and like Wolf, sick. I have a blaster, I can kill, and at that time, everyone was a clown, so no one knew how to no one was teching, so they were dying at like 30 to down smash. So it's like, cool, might as well do this, right? Like I can do that. It's very much a parallel to what Tony was talking about. Like, hey, I can do down smash, forward smash, sick. All right, everyone's losing to this, dope. I'm gonna do that, right? And of course, over time, we've just seen people get exponentially better, and that's where yes, of course, there was still like nerfs to these characters as well, especially in Palutena. But a lot of it really was that people just started to understand the game more. They understood what their characters' strengths were, and they also learned how to mitigate a lot of these weaknesses from their characters. That's when you started to see the rise in a lot of these solo mains because they're like, oh, now I understand this game, and I understand now how to this is the thing that destroys my character, but I now have tactics that are viable and consistent enough to where I can avoid a lot of these major pitfalls, or I just know now what poisons to pick out of the bunch when I'm dealing with these disadvantaged situations. And so then now I'm okay. But I do think that there's a lot of value for people who are able to recognize that there is such a huge paradigm shift that comes from competing against different archetypes, right? And that again goes into what everyone's really talked about already, but like people like Proto, where he's been able to find a strong footing and based on particular aspects of the game that he thinks that his opponents are weak at, he's able to leverage his characters and get some mileage out of it, right? We see it with the Lucina, and we see it with the edge guarding, we see it with the neutral, and obviously Min Min being a very polarizing character. Like it's very intentional how he goes about this way. So I think ultimately pockets are really good for people. I do think that everyone, even if you are a solo main when it comes to tournament, I do think it's good to play some characters to really understand the game more and at least have some kind of vision of what your opponent is looking for. When you're able to kind of get that and understand those like there's general intentions that come to playing like or picking certain characters, then it helps you really break down what you need to be focusing on and really refine that when you're going up against opponents and building out your strategies. So I think that's good. I don't think that because of the global mechanics in this game and stuff too and how things operate, I don't think that pockets are going to be really for everyone, but if you're able to find those that work and really break down the archetypes and you are someone who's like well studied and you have the time, you have the due diligence, and you also recognize that your particular play style with maybe X character really leans to people having to focus on certain facets of the game, and then you can just hit them with the counter strategy, right? With the other character, then like, heck yeah, go for it and make it happen. But yeah, it's so interesting because just in a game like this where you have such a balanced game, we talk about it all the time. You can play pretty much all the characters that you really want to play, and you just have to be realistic about it and really see like what you can actually do, what actual time you can dedicate, and go that route. But yeah, too many people. I do love the point that you made, Charles, where too many people go around and they will pick up characters automatically because they don't want to deal with this thing. I don't like it, so I'm just going to avoid it, right? And that is also that's a very human thing. That's something that has since the beginning of time prevented people from reaching greatness. Something's uncomfortable, so I'm going to avoid it. And in certain instances in life, that helped us in the Stone Age avoid certain things. Like, oh, it's uncomfortable, so I'm gonna stay away from it. But a lot of times that we find nowadays the secret of growth is dealing with that uncomfortability, right? And really taking that challenge and really seeing what's happening here. And then from there, you can really decide if this is for you or not for you. But at least taking that challenge head on. So I would tell anyone, hey, if you have the time and you really want to do this, yeah, but just make sure, like, really, really sit down and recognize why you're doing this and what it's going to take. Because more often than not, people are deceiving themselves, I think, when they're trying to go with these pocket characters. And I think especially for, like, mid-level players and into the high level where people just get caught up because they feel like there's just some easy answer and I can do this and it feels right. And it's like, maybe playing that character will help you recognize certain things that you need to focus on for your true main, as it were. And that can help you get to a better place. but I think you want to exhaust those options first for anything. And I think in Ultimate, there's very few chances that you can't figure out some kind of counter strategy to something that's really strong or what you're dealing with, as powerful as it may be. And that's honestly some of the beauty of this game. And that's why there's no coincidence that we've seen a rise in solo mains later on in the game. The game got refined. People understood the game now. I understood my punish game. I understand how to defend against my opponents. And now my characters are doing well. I remember, I know, Charles, you talked about Light. And I just remember MomoCon 2022, even just seeing, like, it felt like Light was kind of getting back into it, right? And really, really moving. And you could just tell the way he was playing, like the soft hit dash attack stuff that you're talking about, see defensively how he was moving. It's like, okay, a lot of the stuff that would just rob him it wasn't working anymore, right? People just got better defensively. And that's when they realized, no, actually, I don't need to be switching and doing this mix up and all this nonsense. I can play my character and I can win. It just takes time. And I have to be willing to put in that effort. And the answer may not be as clear cut as first. And I do value when people utilize playing different characters to give them a fresh perspective to see what potentially can work and then apply those things, although they may not be as strong as tools, but apply those things to their characters and thrive from that way. But yeah, I think that's really how people need to start looking at pocket characters, if that's a route they're looking at.
I think a good way to conceptualize what Bam and Tony, and me and Charles to some degree, but especially Ben and Tony have been talking about in the last little segments, is win conditions. Because at the end of the day, if you look at like a bad matchup, oftentimes that means that either you cannot achieve like your rewarding win conditions, or you struggle to deny your opponent from their win conditions. And the reality is, like Charles said, like if you cannot achieve your rewarding win conditions, there are probably strategical ways that you can achieve them regardless, like forward throw and game watch to the ledge, or like beating someone with this really like low reward tool until they start playing around it, and then going for your high reward options. And I think in a lot of cases, people get frustrated because they don't look for less rewarding tools. It's like, Kazuya gets to do electric, and if I do what I want to do, I just get hit. Yes, but there are so many factors that go into it that allow you counterplay, right? So yes, Kazuya is really good electric, but that also introduces an element of linearity in his play where his secondary win conditions are really subpar. And so you can look for a character that naturally abuses that, right? By just like naturally shutting down electric. So think about something like a Sephiroth that keeps him at arm's length, or something like a Greninja that cannot get comboed. But you can also you can do the same things with your main character, even if it's less rewarding. And then from there, you can win not just off of risk reward, but off of being a better player. Because at the end of the day, like the more you look at the game as a sequence, like as risk reward, the less you are looking at the game as an information war, right? And by understanding win conditions, shutting down your opponents, achieving your own, and the inevitability of win conditions, right? So in other words, not just about like getting the electric or the situation in which you have to deal with the electric, but also what are the situations leading up to you having to deal with the electric, right? So the long-term strategy. Once you start understanding more and more of that, suddenly like, counterplay becomes ubiquitous. It is everywhere. You can counterplay everything in some sort of way. And what you find is that once you dive into the like approaching it from a win condition perspective, you'll often find a lot of like nuanced win conditions that you didn't find before. So while beforehand you might say, well, if I do my jump in Fox Nair, I'm just going to get electric. But then you realize, well, if I space my Nair like this, I can get a cross up, and because Kazuya's auto turnaround is slower than other fighting game characters' auto turnaround, it actually like he struggles to anti-air it. And now you found like within the win condition, you found a nuance that is just like a slightly different win condition, right? Because like the one is jump in there, but the other one is jump in there at this exact spacing. That allows you to go for it anyway in these specific situations. And what you find is that oftentimes you're going to be more successful by really digging into the nuance of every single win condition that you have, figuring out even like the worst of the worst win conditions. The more tools you have in your belt, the more problems you can solve, right? And oftentimes you find that the deeper you delve into those nuances, those depths, the more problems you're going to be able to solve. Now, again, like there's totally a case to be made for picking up a secondary because some like I said, like some characters just like naturally counter win conditions that you struggle with. So if you play a character like Fox, who is generally bottlenecked by characters that either have like really good out of shield or really good gimping tools, if you pick a character that naturally like is really good at recovering and really good at shutting down like more defensive characters, then you're gonna have like a good, you know, like a natural set of win conditions that complements itself. But at the end of the day, like Charles said, I think it's a question of like how much are you willing to invest, and like Tony said, it's a question of what is fun. Because I think those two are so inherently related. Like people don't spend 500 hours playing a character that isn't fun. Maybe your perfect secondary is Min Min. Maybe you think Min Min is boring as shit. You're not gonna play Min Min for enough time to understand the nuanced win conditions to the degree that your opponent does. And then you're going to get hit by the super nuanced Fox Nair that can approach you, and then you're going to get fucked up. And like that is the reality of a metagame reaching a later stage, which, you know, like that's the transition that we're in, is that like your pockets become less and less successful because of how nuanced these solo mains are. So I think there are other ways that you can still get a lot of effectiveness out of pockets, right? So for example, like characters that are very different than your main, that have like very different win conditions, they are just like that complementary nature can be so powerful that it's worth it. There's also a lot to be said about stages, like Tony mentioned. I think stages are super underrated aspect of having a secondary, right? So there's a lot of validity to it. I think the one pitfall that I would recommend people to avoid is to don't pick a secondary that is close, like that is close to what your main does. I think again, like there are advantages, like, but they're pure, like mostly they're on you, right? Like I don't feel comfortable on this character, so I'm gonna pick this other one, right? Like I don't feel comfortable on Bile if I'm gonna pick Sephiroth. Okay, sure, we're still in like a very similar dynamic. So stuff like that, I think, is generally, if you want to think about like time invested versus payoff, I think those are generally the least worthwhile time investments. So yeah, just some food for thought. I think the more you can like nuance your win conditions, the more tools you have, and the more you understand the tools better than your opponent, the more you're gonna win. Even when it's like Tony said, right? Sometimes you just listen to your opponent, and it's like, well, this jump in there shouldn't work. But it's still working, so we're gonna do it, right? Like at the end of the day, it's not about the matchup; it's about beating the person in front of you. And you can look at it through the lens of the matchup, right? Because at the end of the day, your opponent's gonna be limited by the risk reward. Your opponent's gonna be limited by the tools that you have and they have. But a tool doesn't matter if it's not used.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a big one too is when you invest time into another archetype, like Ramses is suggesting, right? Like, oh, okay, say like in Smash 4. That was like the game I competed the most seriously in. I had Fox and then I had Cloud. Now everyone had a Pocket Cloud. It was kind of like a why not option, but the idea behind it was I wanted a quick, snappy character and I wanted a sword character. So it's two very different archetypes, and especially the worst case scenario that can happen when you pick up another archetype and you try to take it to tournaments and stuff and you use it for counter picking is at the very least you put yourself in that archetype shoes, right? So there's a lot of times when I'm explaining, and this is very basic sword character analysis, but like me explaining to a newer player, like, oh, when Cloud jumps, he's setting up. Like sword characters set up their falling aerials, and a lot of characters set up falling aerials, but with sword characters, they're setting it up with like spacing and stuff, whereas like Fox is trying to fall next to you or cross you up, right? Like everyone has to set up a falling aerial, usually with a jump, and usually don't rise with said aerial. Obviously there is mix-ups and stuff, but it's less safe when you're rising, right? And the idea of sword characters setting up in the air can be a little harder to grasp for newer players unless they play a sword character, because then they're like, oh yeah, well that's why I'm short hopping and stuff like that. So at the very least, if you explore into another archetype, if you don't stick with it, at least you put yourself in their shoes and you're like, oh okay, like this is kind of like what they want, right? Like now I'm in the position where I'm trying to like get those win conditions that I was avoiding, but I'm trying to get them online instead. So at the very least, you get some kind of perspective from it. So that's a huge plus about that. And another thing I want to also make very clear is dual maining and pocketing are two very different things. Like what Proto does is he's not pocketing, because pocketing is like, oh, I'm playing Fox against Game & Watch. Fuck that. I'm not doing it. I'm playing a sword character. Lucina, Cloud, something else, but I'm not playing Fox against Game & Watch. And like for the most part, most Game & Watch mains are solo main, right? Kind of like Pac-Man and stuff like that. I think the only one with like a pocket Game & Watch back in the day was Zachary in the very early part of the meta where he would counterpick you with
He
it.
had a
But
pocket everything, bro.
Everything, yeah. So
Right,
he
right.
doesn't count.
Well,
Yeah.
the only
Pocket
Sora
master.
to win a tournament for how many was it? Multiple years?
Yeah,
Like it
he
was
did for a
just
while.
he played for a week or two, and that's
Remember when
it.
that first happened to you? Everyone was like, "Man, what if that keeps it?" Nope, never again.
Nope.
Never again.
But yeah, a pocket is more designed to like, oh, I don't want to play this matchup with my main, so I use this pocket instead, right? And that's pretty much how a pocket works. A duo main is what Proto and Tweak do and Leo,
Tweak.
where it's like they're like
Stargo.
now they still counterpick, but I would say Proto's the biggest example of a dual main because he plays every matchup with both characters for the most part, or at least from what we've seen, right? He'll switch back and forth in a set, even if his opponent's locking in one character, stuff like that. I feel like with Tweak, he's dual maining, but it's more so off the archetype mentality of like, oh, it's Ice Climbers, like use sword. Oh, it's this, use sword, use Sephiroth, right? But I guess this is pretty hard to explain, but it's Tweak is like a dual mainer that counterpicks, which is kind of like pockets in a sense. But Proto is a true dual main where he's like, I'm down to learn every single matchup with both of these characters. So
Yeah, agree, Charles. When it comes down to like Tweak, you're usually using it more so as a counter pick, as it were, versus.
but actually we've seen Tweak use it multiple characters against the same matchup.
We have.
Like he's tried both Diddy and Sephiroth versus Light. So I guess Tweak is not like full on counter pick only, but usually we see Tweak bringing in an aspect of counter picking, whereas I think Proto is the most like dual main top player we have. Like
I
truly
like
plays any character.
Even there though, like for a Tweak, like because it will, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like even for a Tweak in those situations, it's not that he's like trying to go back and forth because he's trying to give you a mix up. It's usually him going back and forth because he's trying to figure out what character he should be playing in that matchup. Yeah. Correct. So like I think if he knew exactly what character he wanted to play versus Light, like he wouldn't switch it up, right? Versus Proto, like regardless, you're gonna see a switch up for him. He usually like you rarely see him be like, I'm only playing this character versus this character, and that's it. Like I'm only playing Min, and not at all are you ever gonna see this Lucina, right? That's I think that's more rare for him there. So I think that's kind of the thing we see from Tweak, more so of him trying to find the character who is optimal for him in that particular matchup.
Yeah, I agree. And then Proto's like curveball based off like stage picks, yada yada.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting that not even just Tweak and Leo, but in general, most of our listeners only have thousands of hours of time playing the game. And then even if you are not a top player, once you start getting into the tens of thousands of hours, I think it's a lot more common for players to play what they think is interesting, to just see develop, just to play a character and see what it looks like if they were to theoretically push the character in this way or that way. And I think that in that sense, players like Tweak and Leo are more of just a matter of people with like 5-figure hours into the game. Because I've seen a lot of players who have been playing the game since Melee Brawl, where they'll just pick up a character that won't even be a meta character, and they'll just say, I want to see what this character looks like when they develop. I think this slept on. Not a top tier, just slept on. And I would like to see what that character looks like, even if the character isn't good. So I think that's something that happens a lot with players like Tweak and Leo, where they just think it would be interesting, or, hey, that just sounds fun to me. Which it's a little bit different from the I just do it for fun. But as mentioned before, if you don't have fun with it, you're not going to do it for 500 hours. Why are you going to do it for 5,000 hours? If you're not going to do it for 5,000 hours, how are you going to do it for 10,000? Yeah. So like there's a lot that goes into it. It's not like our top players are just scrubby or anything. It's a matter of they have to invest into things that don't make them bored with the game, essentially. True. So
for sure.
One of the best things you can do for yourself in the game is don't be bored with it, because if you're bored, then you're not going to practice. And as we mentioned in the Incineroar episode, it is better to be the best Incineroar than the best Palutena on the planet right now. And that's probably related to things other than character choice being more important in your efficacy of performance. So the better character does not always win, even if it's the best user of that character versus the best user of a different character. That's just not how it works. So get good, and you get good by practicing good.
Get good, Gyms. Get it
Get
together.
good.
All right, well, we're going to have to cut it a little short on this episode of Coach's Corner, but I hope you guys enjoyed the content. And yeah, really interesting topic. Let us know in the comments below what you think about pocket picks or dual maining or all that jazz. And yeah, we'll see you on the next episode. Class dismissed.